The man had checked twice. No pulse, no movement, no witnesses. He dumped the body deep inside an abandoned forest, convinced the nightmare was finally over. But 24 hours later, his phone rang. A trembling voice whispered only 4 words. "I'm still alive, Daniel." At that moment, the hunter became the hunted, because somewhere out there, the woman he believed he had murdered was still breathing. And she remembered everything. It was supposed to be the perfect crime. Months of planning, every detail carefully calculated. No fingerprints, no security cameras, no witnesses. Daniel Carter, a respected financial consultant living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, believed he had planned the impossible, a murder that could never be traced back to him. To everyone around him, Daniel was charming, intelligent, and successful. Behind closed doors, however, he carried a secret that had been eating away at him for years. A secret worth killing to protect. The only person who knew the truth was Emily Foster. She trusted him. She believed he was her closest friend. She had no idea she had just become his biggest threat. 3 months earlier, Emily accidentally discovered irregular financial records while helping Daniel organize documents for a charity event. At first, she thought they were simple accounting mistakes. But the numbers didn't add up. Large sums of money had disappeared into offshore accounts linked to fake companies. The deeper she looked, the more disturbing the picture became. Millions of dollars had vanished over several years. Daniel wasn't just stealing. He had built an entire criminal operation behind the respectable image everyone admired. Emily confronted him. She gave him one chance to explain. Instead, Daniel smiled. Not because he had an answer, because he had already made a decision. If Emily couldn't be convinced to stay silent, she would never speak again. Daniel spent the next 2 days pretending everything was normal. He answered Emily's text messages. He joked with her over the phone. He even invited her to dinner, claiming he had finally found an explanation for the suspicious bank transfers. Emily hesitated. Something about Daniel's voice felt different. Still, she wanted answers. On Friday evening, she drove to Daniel's secluded lake house, nearly 40 miles outside the city. The property sat alone, surrounded by dense pine trees. There were no nearby neighbors, no passing traffic, and almost no cell phone signal. Exactly as Daniel had planned. The dinner began quietly. Daniel poured wine while Emily asked questions about the missing money. His answers were vague. Whenever she pressed harder, he changed the subject. Then Emily reached into her handbag. "I made copies of the documents," she said calmly. "If anything happens to me, someone else will see them." For a brief second, Daniel froze. His carefully controlled smile disappeared. Without warning, he grabbed a heavy brass candle holder from the table. Emily looked up just as it came crashing toward her head. The room erupted into chaos. She screamed and tried to run, but Daniel tackled her before she could reach the front door. A violent struggle followed. Furniture shattered. Glass exploded across the floor. Emily fought with everything she had, scratching Daniel's face and knocking over a lamp. But Daniel was stronger. He struck her again. Everything went dark. Rain poured throughout the night. Daniel wrapped Emily's unconscious body in a tarp and loaded her into the trunk of his SUV. He drove for nearly an hour into an abandoned forest where an old logging road disappeared beneath overgrown weeds. The only sounds were thunder and the distant cries of wild animals. Daniel dragged the motionless body into a shallow ravine. He checked her pulse. Nothing, or so he believed. Satisfied, he covered her with branches and leaves before driving away. As the taillights disappeared into the darkness, Emily's fingers twitched. Minutes later, she coughed. A faint breath escaped her lips. She wasn't dead, barely conscious and suffering from a severe head injury. Emily crawled through the mud, leaving a trail of blood behind her. Hours passed. She collapsed again and again. Just before sunrise, an elderly hunter named Thomas Walker noticed movement near a creek. He rushed over. At first, he thought he had discovered a body. Then Emily whispered 2 barely audible words. "Help me." Thomas immediately called emergency services. Doctors later admitted that if she had been found even 30 minutes later, she would not have survived. Daniel awoke the next morning believing his nightmare was over. He cleaned his house, burned Emily's belongings, deleted every message between them. By afternoon, he had almost convinced himself he was safe. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Silence. Then, a weak female voice. I'm still alive. Daniel's blood turned cold. His breathing stopped. Daniel. Click. The line went dead. He stared at the phone. It couldn't be. He had left her for dead. He had checked. Hadn't he? For the first time since committing the crime, Daniel felt genuine fear. Meanwhile, inside the intensive care unit, Detective Sarah Collins watched Emily drift in and out of consciousness. Although Emily couldn't speak clearly, she managed to write a single name on a notepad. Daniel. That one word transformed the investigation into a race against time. Because detectives knew something Daniel didn't. If Emily recovered, she could identify her attacker, and Daniel would do almost anything to stop that from happening. Detective Sarah Collins had investigated homicide cases for nearly 15 years. One thing stood out immediately. Daniel Carter wasn't acting like a grieving friend. He was acting like a man preparing for something. During questioning, Daniel appeared calm. Too calm. He claimed he hadn't seen Emily since the previous week. But surveillance footage from a gas station told a different story. His SUV had been recorded heading toward the lake house on the very night Emily disappeared. Then another piece of evidence surfaced. Investigators found traces of Emily's blood inside the trunk of Daniel's vehicle. The DNA match came back within hours. Daniel's perfect crime was beginning to unravel. Meanwhile, Emily slowly regained her strength. Her memories returned in painful fragments. The dinner, the argument, the candle holder, the darkness. When Detective Collins asked if she recognized the man who attacked her, Emily didn't hesitate. It was Daniel. Those 3 words were enough for prosecutors to issue an arrest warrant. But when officers arrived at Daniel's home, he was gone. Daniel knew the police were closing in. He packed a suitcase, emptied his bank accounts, and headed toward the state border. But panic clouds judgment. He withdrew thousands of dollars from an ATM. He paid cash at a roadside motel. He purchased fuel using a loyalty card registered in his own name. Each decision left another trail. Detectives tracked his movements hour by hour. By sunrise, they knew exactly where he was headed. Daniel abandoned his SUV and disappeared into a remote cabin deep in the mountains. He believed he had finally escaped. He was wrong. Police helicopters circled overhead. K-9 units searched the forest. As officers closed in, Daniel made one last desperate attempt to flee through the trees. He slipped on wet rocks and fell down a steep embankment. Within minutes, he was surrounded. Daniel Carter, an officer shouted, "Show us your hands." Exhausted and with nowhere left to run, Daniel slowly surrendered. The man who had spent months planning the perfect murder had been defeated by his own mistakes. The courtroom was silent. Prosecutors presented photographs from the lake house, DNA evidence from Daniel's SUV, financial records proving the motive. And finally, Emily took the witness stand. The courtroom watched in complete silence as she described the attack. She recalled every terrifying moment. The smile on Daniel's face, the blow that knocked her unconscious, the feeling of waking up alone in the freezing forest, believing she was about to die. When she finished speaking, many jurors wiped away tears. Daniel showed no emotion. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty, Daniel Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, he looked toward Emily one final time. She didn't look back. She had already survived the worst night of her life. She wasn't going to let him take another moment from her. Sometimes, the smallest mistake is all it takes to expose even the most carefully planned crime. Daniel believed he had committed the perfect murder. But he made one fatal error. He never imagined his victim would survive. Emily's courage and determination transformed what could have been a forgotten tragedy into a story of resilience and justice. If you enjoyed this crime thriller, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping crime stories every week. And remember, the truth has a way of finding the people who try hardest to bury it. The end.